Hi there, and welcome to Working with Adobe XD Part 1. So when we launch Adobe XD, and the current version that I'm working in is XD 2020, so if you're running a slightly older version of XD or a different version of XD, things might look a little bit different. But right as of this recording, this is the most recent version of Adobe XD. So when you launch the program, you get this window that pops up. And that gives you the option to create a new project with specific sizes. So if you're working for mobile, tablet, desktop, or a custom size, you can click these little drop downs and they will show different phone sizes. So if you wanted to work with Android, the newest iPhones, iPads, iPad Pro, Android tablets, Surface Pros, and then your desktop sizes. And these are just standard desktop sizes that are available. You can also type in a custom width and height if you wanted to, and that would create a custom size for you. So for this demo, we're going to go ahead and start with a desktop size. And I'm just going to leave it to that largest size at 1920 by 1080. And I'm just going to click that, and that will launch a new prototype for me. So you'll notice when this launches, XD has a very limited toolbar. This is my toolbar over here. What that means is that XD, while you can create some assets within XD, it is not meant for asset creation. So what I mean by assets are your images, your illustrations, your icons, things like that. Those should be done in other programs like Photoshop or Illustrator. So any photo editing you do should already be done in Photoshop and sized within Photoshop and then brought within to XD. Same with if you're doing any illustration, you should do the bulk of that in Illustrator. That's what Illustrator is meant to do. You can draw some basic shapes within XD. There is your rectangle, circle, triangle, and line tool, as well as a pen tool, which should look familiar to you, and then your type tool as well. So a large reminder, as you are working on your project within XD, XD can only handle web format files. So that is your JPEGs, your GIFs, your PNGs, and your SVGs only. You are not allowed to put PDFs in there. It will not handle that. The reason being is that if you're making a project, XD assumes that you are going to actually create this project for the web or for digital media, and those cannot handle PDFs. So you want to make sure you have web format files. So anything you are saving, make sure they're ready to go. Like you're not bringing in PSDs, you're not bringing in AI files, you're bringing in web graphics. The other reminder for XD is this is a prototype tool. XD does not create fully functional websites. It does not create fully functional mobile apps. It's a prototype tool. It's meant to test and work through your design before it would go to a developer. Some of these assets can be shared to your developers if you are working with us in a development team, but it does not create fully functional sites. So let's break down some of the XD workspace. So within the XD workspace, I have my artboard here. Now this represents the screen size. Up top, I have 3 different modes that I can work in. Design mode is where you're going to do your designing. So when you're working on your prototype, you'll be designing in design mode. Makes sense. When you want to prototype, so if I have multiple artboards and I want to start doing interactions, I will go into prototype mode, and we will cover that more in depth when we get a prototype. And when I hit share, I can now share my completed prototype or my designs with someone on my team. So XD is meant to be a collaborative tool. So ideally, if I'm working on my prototype, I'm going to share it with my client. I'm going to share it with my art director. I'm going to share it so people can make comments on it, on the design, so that way I can edit it. So those are the 3 modes of XD. So we're going to flip back over to design mode so we can start designing. So now when I'm working in the XD space, if I want to change the browser fill color, that would give a full background to the whole site, I can simply click on the entire background. And over here in the appearance panel, it shows me that I have a fill of white. If I click on that fill, I can change it to a light blue-gray color, make it kind of a nice light neutral color, And then I can drop that opacity to 80%. That looks pretty nice. So now I'm going to work with my rectangle tool to create a header for my site. So I'm going to grab that rectangle tool and I'm simply going to drag out a rectangle, just like any other rectangle tool you've ever worked with. If I look over here under the components, I can see that the width is 1920. That's the width of my artboard. I can type in custom numbers here, so I'm going to set this to 125 pixels high. And that creates a pixel height for that. Under the appearance of this, I can start changing the fill and the stroke color. So by default, your items will have a white fill and a gray stroke. So I'm going to just set that fill to black. I can also type in that hex color, which is #000 if I wanted to. Make that nice black. And I'm going to turn the border off. I can just unclick it and that will turn that stroke off. By default, your shapes will have that. You can also set a bigger stroke if you wanted to. I could set 6-point stroke. I can make it dashed. I can give a gap. I'm just going to leave it at nothing. And check that. And there is my header for my site. Now I'm going to begin to import some graphic elements into this. So if you download the assets zip folder off the course folder, that will have everything that we're going to use in here. So to import those, I'm going to go to File, Import. For me, that's in my Downloads folder. And I'm going to locate the logo, the Facebook icon, Twitter icon, and an Instagram icon. So here's the icon for Twitter. I'm going to grab my logo white. There's an icon for Facebook, an icon for Instagram, and I'm going to hit import. And that's going to load up these 4 assets for me. So then I can move these icons here, grab it, and I'll move my logo over here. So I want to note that there is a difference in placing images as opposed to dragging and dropping an image into something. So I can grab from my assets folder any of these. I have these really nice background photos of mountains, so I can just grab one and just drag and drop within to my site, and that works really well. I can scale it very easily and move it around. So if you're working full frame of that image, that's fine. You can just drag and drop these in. It goes very quickly. However, you can't crop it easily. If I only wanted half of this mountain, there's no crop tool. I can only scale it. So that becomes problematic if I don't want to use the entirety of an image. Another way to approach that is if I wanted this to be a smaller image, I would take my rectangle tool, and I can also take a shape tool. I'll show you those too. And I could draw out a square. Can make it a diamond, I guess. A nice square. And then I can drag and drop that background into that frame, and then that's going to crop that for me to the size that I want to, and I can adjust that within that frame, so it becomes a little bit easier to manipulate. You can also, if I wanted a circular image, I can drag to a circle, and now I've got that type of image. I can make a cool triangle. So your triangle tool works very similar to the one in Illustrator. If you hit the up and down arrow keys on your keyboard, that's all I'm doing. Up will add more points, down will remove points. So if I wanted a cool pentagon shaped box here, I could have that. And then I can simply drag and drop my image in there as well. And that's a way that you can get shaped assets within to your site. So I'm going to do it. I don't actually want some of these assets in here, so I'm going to clear these off. That was just to show you how they work. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one and keep this nice full frame, or the one that's in a frame, so that way I can kind of scale it to this the size of my page, and this is going to become the background image for my site. I'm going to turn off that border so it doesn't have that 1 pixel gray border around it. So now I want to show you a very cool feature within XD called the background blur. So I want to place my logo onto, let me go ahead and bring it to the front here. And that key command is the same as any of the other. You can also do arrange, bring forward, bring back. If you right click on it, it's also under object, arrange, bring to front. I just hotkeyed it, if you're wondering, because the stacking order works very similarly to Illustrator, and how you bring things in is how they stack. So if I bring my logo in here, it may not work if I put it over everything. So I'm gonna make this a little larger. There we go, so we can see it. That looks okay on this dark part, but not so great if I put it over here. So maybe I'm gonna put a circle behind it that'll blur the background, and then I can put it over everything. So I'm gonna draw an ellipse the same size as my logo here. And right now it just looks like that, not all that exciting. I'm gonna turn the border off. And then I'm gonna select background blur. And that's a really cool feature that when laid over something blurs out that background. So I can see that I can still see the mountains through it, but it's kind of blurry. I can adjust how much blur, so I can make it a little more in focus, a little blurrier. I can adjust the brightness of it, so if it's whiter or if it's darker. And then the percentage. So you can adjust this to whatever look you are going for. I find it to be kind of a cool thing. So, and I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger than the logo, just so we can see where it is. Then I'm going to put that behind one. So that was object arrange, send back, not send to back, just send back one. And now so if I select both of these objects, the logo and that circle, no matter where I place it, you're kind of getting that background blur effect. It's a really cool effect, especially over photos. So that's background blur. Another thing of note is that vector SVGs are editable within XD. So these SVGs that we grabbed are editable. So if I zoom in a little bit so you can see it better, our logo here. I have my logo and it is an SVG. So if I wanted to edit those points within XD, I can. I can double click multiple times. It may take several double clicks to click in and drill down on the object that you want. It's a little bit frustrating, it's a little bit ham-fisted, but I've drilled in and you can see that I now have all the individual points of this SVG. So if I wanted to change, maybe make the peak of this mountain a little bit higher, I can do so within XD. It is a relatively useful feature if you're making very small edits. However, I recommend always jumping back and editing your original Illustrator file. If you are actually making changes to something like a logo or an illustration, it's not the easiest thing to do within XD. However, it is possible that I could click and move some of these points around. I can delete that, that's an extra point. Just hit the delete key. I could also grab my pen tool and I can sit and draw within XD as well, and that works like the pen tool within Illustrator. So let's explore that a little bit more. I'm gonna delete that, that's not great. And let's draw a basic magnifying glass for our search feature. So to draw our magnifying glass, I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, and I'm gonna hold down the shift key to draw that perfect circle. And I'll draw my ellipse. Now I want it to have no fill, but I want it to have a nice thick white border. So I can select that white color, pound FFF is white, and I'm going to make this a lot thicker. Let's try 7. There we go, that looks much better. Knock it up to 8 maybe. That looks good. So it becomes the circle of the magnifying glass. And then I'm going to use the line tool to draw the little handle of my magnifying glass. Just draw at a nice angle. Again, I'm going to make that handle white. And there, that makes the handle. I can round the cap, so it makes it a little more rounded. That looks pretty good. Might be a little long, so I can jump back in. And let me make that just a wee bit smaller. So if I click it with my arrow tool and drill down, I can see there are my 2 points. I can do the same thing with that. There's the 4 points of the circle. Make that just a little bit shorter. And now I want to use that pen tool to draw a little bit of a shine right in the magnifying glass. So let me zoom in just a little bit. It's always helpful to zoom in when you're drawing. So if I click with my pen tool and drag, I can get my curves and draw another point. And I only need the 2 points, so let me go, make that white. Click off of that so I don't get that rubber band effect. And double click to kind of drill down. So because I did a click and drag, I do get the Bezier curves, just like in Illustrator. Get to zoom in, it's very hard for me to see. There we go. And just trying to emulate that curve a little bit. That looks pretty nice. I'm going to make it just a wee bit thicker and around the ends as well to make it a little bubblier. Let's try a 3 pixel border. That looks nice. And there's my magnifying glass in a couple pieces. Now there's still individual pieces, so I can move them around, but I want to group them, so I'm going to just, with my selection tool, holding down Shift, select all 3 pieces, and then I'm going to group that. It's Object Group or Command G, just like everything else. Now that I've got that grouped, I can move it over with my other icons, so that way I can make my search feature within my site. So now that we've got a couple assets, I want to start working with some of these assets over here to the left. This palette that we haven't worked too much in it, but this is where we can start building our global assets that are going to go across multiple pages. It speeds up your workflow if you start putting in things like color, character styles, and components and assets within your XD site. So to go ahead and add this, I'm going to select my magnifying glass and I'm going to hit Command K. Okay, now components. And that brought it into my components panel. I can rename this to search or magnifying glass. Search, we'll call it magnifying glass, so that it's helpful to name your stuff. That way when you start getting a lot of components, you're not like, what is that? I can't tell. So now that I have this, whenever I would need to in another page, if I wanted to bring one out, I can simply drag it out of my components. And I have that used. I can use it across multiple pages. So now I want to start adding text to my site. And there's 2 options for text. There's point text and area text. And this is very similar to Illustrator. So if I want point text, I'll just grab my text tool and I will simply click. And I can say, welcome to Colorado. Great. And that will give me point text so that when I'm done typing, you can see that blue box around everything. If I want area text, so area text is useful if you're doing large areas of text, a lot of body text. I'll take that text tool and click and draw a box. And I can type in the same thing, welcome to Colorado. There's not a ton of difference initially. You can just simply click and type. Let me go ahead and change this color so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to make that white. for both of them. So now the bigger difference is that if I copied and pasted this, it would just keep filling the box that I drew. Versus if I copied this and started pasting it, it would just go in a line forever because it's point type. So, however, with the area type tool, I can make this box bigger, I can make it smaller, depending on where I want to put it, versus if I have this, I can't change the size of that. I can, however, move and rotate. That gives me the little dot at the bottom. I can start stretching it. I can start scaling it that way. It does slightly different tools. So if I wanted to convert my area text over, or my point text over to area text, I can do so. The little box right over here allows me to go from this to area text, so that doesn't visually look different, but I can now change that box. You see the difference in the features. I can also jump back and forth the same way with the area. I can convert it to point, and that snaps it down. So that's over here in that text panel. So I'm just going to work with my point text right now since I only have a small headline. All of your features are over here in this little text panel. So by default, we have Helvetica New. You'll be able to see all the fonts installed within your computer. It is important to note that if you're trying to make an actual website, you should use actual web fonts. Those are not the same as a system font or as a desktop font. Web fonts are meant to be self-hosted on the web, so please double check that before you just start playing fast and loose with type. For this class, however, it's okay to pick some of your different fonts. So I'm just going to stick with Helvetica New. I think it's a nice font. I'm going to make it larger. There we go. Welcome to Colorado. And I can see that as I grab that, it changed the size. I can also change the weight here. There's all the versions of that Helvetica New. I have left, center, and right justify. I have my leading. I can also do the really fun things like I can make it small caps, all caps, superscript, subscript, which I don't really want right now, all lowercase, upper lowercase. So that's pretty cool. Maybe I'll track it out just a little bit. And since it's all caps, let's just make that a wee bit bigger. Let's try 150. Great. Let's make it bold a little bit. Make a nice big headline. Wonderful. That looks great. So if I decide, hey, this is a nice headline font and I want to use it across multiple places, it's great to put that in your character styles. It'll save you a ton of time as you're working with text to start adding things into your character styles. So if I have that selected, I can simply hit plus, and you see that that adds in for me Helvetica New 150 point bold. So if I were to type out another piece of type here, and let's go ahead and change that a little bit so you can see the difference. Let's make that that font, this color. And I go, ooh, no, gross, I want to change my mind. I can simply just click the character style and it will snap everything to that style. Again, it's very helpful to name these because if you keep going on and on and on and have a bunch, you're probably not going to remember what you use them for. So I'm going to rename this to being main headline. So that way I know when I'm working that that's my main headline font. So now we're going to create multiple artboards and device sizes. So if I zoom out here, I haven't made any other pages in my site. To duplicate an artboard, you can just simply click where this says Web 1020 by 1. I can click that and I can do Command D, and that will duplicate that artboard. Again, the hotkey is Command D for duplicate. So I can also create a custom new artboard simply with my artboard tool. I can click on that and just drag out whatever size that I would like. I can also set how big I want this to be. So if I said I still wanted it to be 1920 by 700, I'm not sure. That will create, I can type in that size. I recommend if you're trying to make sure that everything is consistently sized, you can do that. We'll do pop-up windows and overlays in our next videos, but you can manually type those in as well. And I don't want this artboard, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. You can also, I'm going to pan around once you start getting multiple artboards. You're just going to hold down the space bar to pan around. Once you start getting multiple artboards, I highly suggest naming them because when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to get very confusing, especially prototyping. So I'm going to rename this and just call this one Home. I'll rename this one and just call it About for right now. And those have renamed my artboards for me. To add different size artboards that are automatically come in pre-populated at the correct size that you want for tablet and mobile, you can simply click on your artboard tool, and that's going to give you a list on the right here of different devices. So I'm going to go ahead and click on iPad to give me an iPad. Then I'm going to click on the newest iPhone, so the iPhone XR. It doesn't have the 11 yet. And those will give me the screen sizes for the iPad and the iPhone. So once I have those, I'm going to try and keep myself a little more organized here. Grab my selection tool. I'm going to move my iPad. Just to click on the whole artboard, I'm going to click on the name iPad 1 and drag it underneath here because I'm going to turn these into the home pages for tablet and for mobile. And I'm going to just drag this one down here so I now know I've got my iPhone X here. I'm going to rename this artboard iPad Home so that way it keeps me organized. Then iPhone XR Home. So that way I can remember that this is that size and that this is the home screen. So now I want to adjust this artwork from my home page to go to mobile. So I'm going to select all my artwork here. I'm going to clone it by holding down the Alt Option key, and Shift will allow me to drag down. So I'm holding down both Alt Option and Shift. Note that I am on a Mac, so it does make a little bit of a difference. And by default, responsive resize is turned on. So therefore, when I start to scale this, you can see that the artwork is starting to respond responsively, which is pretty cool. So it's automatically trying to become responsive. However, I understand that this is a big difference in size. It's totally changing the orientation of things, and I might have to adjust where some of these objects go. So I'm going to grab my icons here and move them over. I'm going to shrink this down. Shrink down my photo. Welcome to Colorado. And adjust these to fit a little bit better. On my new site. So now that's looking a little bit better for my tablet. Grabbing that one. Move that for a second so I can actually grab this guy. Say don't be afraid to zoom in if you need to, especially if you're moving stuff around, if you're having a difficult time selecting stuff like I was, where it keeps trying to select the wrong thing. There we go. That looks much better. And now we're sized for tablet. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that artwork as well. So holding down Alt, Option, and Shift, and I'm going to size for the phone. And that responsive resize is helping. For the most part. It is not perfect, but it does help. And getting that all adjusted for tablet and mobile. Size those up just a little bit because I feel like they're getting a little small for mobile. And I did size down that font because we did that responsive resize, but I want it to get a little bigger. Oops. So let me pop that up to maybe 45. That looks all right. Here we go. Welcome to Colorado. So while XD does help you do some of that sizing for tablet and mobile, it still does come down to you as the designer to make your final adjustments. And now I have my home page sized for desktop, tablet, and mobile. The last thing for this video is working with UI kits. There are a plethora of UI kits that are freely available to plug into XD to work with for wireframing and already built assets for Apple, for Android, for Google, for things like that. So if you're trying to use already existing templates that say, hey, this is what an Apple iOS looks like, these icons and things like that, they're already out there. You do not have to draw them, which is very nice. So in order to use those and bring them into XD, you can go up to File, Get UI Kits. First one I'm going to grab is wireframes, and that's going to jump me onto Behance. And this is a great one. There's 2 free wireframe kits. They're all in blue. This is meant for very quickly prototyping where you're not getting tripped up on what does the art look like. It's a bunch of basic interaction. You'll just hit download kits and that will download it to your device. And that's going to open up 2 XD files. One is for web and one is for mobile. So I'm going to double click on the web one. And that's going to open up a new project for me. There it goes. And you can tell there's a ton of elements in here. And this is wonderful for building a very quick wireframe. So I'm going to zoom in and you can pan around, take a look at this and play with them. They're very fun. First one is your basic UI elements. So I've got navigation bars, I've got buttons, I've got some basic typography, I've got cards that I can use, flow charts if you're building a flow chart. There's forms if you're trying to create a basic form within your site. There's portfolio sections, so if you're wanting to build a portfolio, call to actions and footers. And all of these are readily available for you to use and begin to build your prototype in XD with. So we're going to have fun with one of these. I'm just going to grab a form element. So I'll zoom in and let me grab this form right here. And grab the whole thing. So I'm going to just copy it. I'm going to jump back over to my project that I'm working with and watch our assets panel here as I paste some of them in because all of these things were converted into, oops, it's the wrong screen I clicked on. All of these are converted already into assets. You see them in these components. So they've already been added. When I paste them in here, they're going to pop some of those in. So now if I'm working on my site and I said, you know what, I want to have a form, I don't have to spend the time creating all these form elements. I've got them, and now I can simply say, okay, I'm going to change some of these to match my color. So if I click on it and say, you know, I wanted a gray border instead of a blue border, great. And even if I said, hey, I really like this gray color, let me go ahead and add that to my color palette. Cool, there's that gray that I used. So now I can simply add that gray to all of my other objects working with my color palette. So let's look at some of the other things that we can bring in and work with in XD. So I'm going to go back up to File, Get UI Kits, and I'm going to hit More UI Kits because there's a ton of them out here. This will bring you into Adobe's website for XD. Have fun. I highly recommend spend some time looking around, downloading kits. These are UI kits exclusively made for XD, where, you know, if I want to look at some auto animate, I want to look at some responsive design, I want to, you know, if you're building something for a watch, there's a bunch of these that you can simply start to download that people have made available. Be sure to read the copyright rules on any of this. You do not want to infringe upon copyrights. If you are downloading stuff, note that you can even just do a basic Google search for some of these UI kits, and you will find plenty of them out there. Some are free, some are paid, that you can pay for some of these assets to use as well. Be sure always to look at copyrights and make sure that you are not infringing on somebody's copyright. But take a look at some of these different prototypes that you can download and mess around with. The last one I want to show you, if I'm jumping back into XD, is under Get UI Kits, is up here. So I can go to Apple iOS, and that's going to take me to the Apple developer page. When I scroll down, there's wonderful download for XD. I can get these iOS kits and Mac OS for XD. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. It's going to take a second. I'm going to also download the Mac OS one because, hey, I'm on the page. I can get the Apple TV. And it's going to take me through a couple things. Go. And that gives me a bunch of these production templates. I'm going to go into UI elements and guidelines. So UI elements for the iPhone. Let's go ahead and look at that. And you can unpack some of these all on your own. You don't have to watch me do it. I'm going to log out here in a second. And this will give me a bunch of these iPhone UI elements. So if you were designing a phone and you wanted to have the default buttons, so hey, what does this look like if I'm in text? Here's that cut, copy, paste. You've seen all this on your iPhone if you have an iPhone. How does that iOS look? And you're welcome to use these as you're prototyping if you're trying to get that true iPhone look and feel to your prototype. Apple has made these available for you. So default action, you know, if I'm clicking, what is this asking me to do? Hey, is this say save, delete, disable? I have my dark mode, light modes, keyboards. Got my emojis that you can go ahead and bring in all of these into your template. So make sure you look around and download a bunch of these and play around with them and what can they do for your prototype. So I hope this kind of has gotten you into a little bit of XD. This is the first of a couple videos that will dive a little bit deeper into the different features of XD, but start playing around with the different features and start building something basic. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.